My next question comes from Dawn, Pastor Steve. And she says, what is the viewpoint in the Bible on cremation? What does the Bible say about getting cremated when you die versus burial?
You know, the only passages that deal with cremation in the Bible basically have to do with Saul. King Saul, at the end of 1 Samuel, is killed, and then his body is hung up on a wall, and later on, they come and take his family comes and takes his body down with those of his sons, and then they burn the bones. Basically, they burn what's left, and so that's one of the major passages on cremation in the Bible. Generally speaking, the Jews buried their dead, and they didn't bury their dead like we bury our dead. What they did was there's a lot of limestone in Israel. And so there's a bunch of limestone caves, and so they would take a cave, and they would block it up, and they would make it into a tomb. And so the way that they buried their dead was they would take the body in and wrap it up, leave it there for a year, and after a year was up, they go back into the tomb and take the bones and put them in what's called a bone box. And it's called an ossuary. Put them in an ossuary, and then they had a place, for the next person who had died, and they would have a place in the tomb for the ossuary. And so that was the burial practices in Israel. There's not a passage that says thou shalt bury. There's not a passage that says thou shalt not cremate. And so, generally speaking, when I'm talking to people about this issue, one of the reasons that Christians down through the years have buried their dead is because of the resurrection and the fact that there's going to be a resurrection, and many times burial was a kind of a looking forward to that, and so we bury our dead in certain ways in response to the resurrection. But the fact is that everybody's getting resurrected whether they got buried or not. And so, if I die at sea, and I die in a shipwreck, then what happens then is, predators come and take my body apart, and I become
cremated.
I become fish poo floating out in the ocean.
Yeah.
At that point. And so the fact that my body has been dispersed doesn't mean that God's not going to raise me from the dead, or that that's going to be an issue. Nowadays, when I'm talking to people about this, most often it's an issue of cost, frankly, because it costs so much. Yep. It's thousands of dollars to bury someone, and that is not the norm for the human race all through history. If we were living in the 1800s and I died, my wife would bury me out back and put up a little cross, and that's where I would be. And obviously we can't do that nowadays, and so we have to have cement vaults, and even in a grave, cement vaults and that kind of thing. And so that's prohibitive. And so when I talk to people, I just let them know that God knows your heart. God knows what's going on. The Bible doesn't say thou shalt bury people, and it doesn't say thou shalt not cremate people. And people will bring up things in history where guys who thought that if they burned their bodies, God wouldn't be able to find them, and so there'd be no resurrection of them. And that's just nonsense. Mm-hmm. Like God sitting up there going, oh, you got me.
Right.
I'm not going to be able to find you. And that's just nonsense. So what unbelievers did with that is another issue altogether. So
I have heard pastors talk about how cremation was pagan and burial was Christian. But as far as any religious aspect or spiritual aspect to it, the Bible doesn't land one way or the other.
Right, yeah. It's like, there are traditions, and then there are commandments. And so we have traditions, as far as Christianity goes. And again, frankly, it's because it was so cheap. If you're a Jew, you have a cave near you, and you buy a burial plot, and you go and bury them in a cave. And if you're living in Western Europe, you buried your family members on your land, and so as a matter of fact, that's a whole lot easier than burning a body, at the times, in ancient times. It takes a lot to burn a body. And so, again, the Bible doesn't say one way or another. And
did you get to go to the catacombs when we went on the trip down in there? Mm-hmm. Yeah, that was awesome.
Yeah.
You go down there and they you don't realize how big it is when you get down there, and it's like, feels like it's like 30, 40 degrees or 50 degrees. Really cool when it's hot out. That's a cool thing.
Yeah.